Hello everyone, welcome to the Current Affairs module. Today we will be discussing about India's Space Policy 2023, which was recently released by the government. Now this policy is important because until 1990s, Indian space industries and space economy, it was only defined by one agency, which was your Indian Space Research Organization, that is ISRO. Now, by the implementation of this policy, what will happen is that the private sector involvement will be increased in the space exploration sector. Earlier, it was only limited to building designs and specifications which were required by ISRO. The private sector role was very, very limited. Now, this policy says that ISRO is going to focus on research and development of new space technologies and their application, and it will also focus on expanding the human understanding of the outer space. That is, the exploration in the outer space and its understanding is going to increase, and all this will be done with the help of private sector. They are going to introduce the role of private sector is going to increase now in the space exploration using this policy. Now, the Indian space policy, it unveils the government's plan to let private enterprises carry out end-to-end activities. Now, what are these end-to-end activities? They will range from launching the satellites and rockets into space to operating Earth stations to everything. They will not be limited to your designs and specifications which were required by ISRO, which was the key function of your private sector earlier. Okay, so this is the crux of the policy. We will study about the specifications, what are the gaps in the policies, why this policy is important, etc. in this module completely. Before starting up with the key features of the policy, let us understand what is the vision of this policy. Now, this policy is to augment the space capabilities. As I told you, they want that the space exploration and understanding of the space increases in the humans. So that is why it is to augment space capabilities. Now they want to enable, encourage and develop a flourishing commercial presence in the space. Commercial presence, that means the private sector presence should be increased in the space. Earlier, which was only occupied with the government agencies, basically that was ISRO. Use space as a driver of technology development and drive benefits in allied sectors or allied areas. That is, whatever we discover in the space or new technologies developed for the space exploration, they should be benefiting the allied sectors wherever they can be used. Okay. Now, pursue international relations and create an ecosystem for effective implementation of space application among all stakeholders. It doesn't mean that only the India's private sector holders are going to be part of this policy. Now they say that when we are developing a technology, we have to pursue international relations. That is, we are creating an ecosystem in the world so that the technology sharing is there, all the stakeholders are there. They help in effective implementation of all the space applications which are being created. Now, the purpose of the policy. What is the purpose of this policy? Why all these things we are planning to do? Because we want to increase the socio-economic development and security of the nation. We want to achieve this target of socio-economic development and security. We want to protect our environment and lives. Then the peaceful exploration of outer space is very important, and this policy is going to serve the target also. And public awareness and scientific quest are another two purposes which are going to be served by this policy. Now let's understand what are the key highlights of this policy, or basically what was done or what new agencies or new bodies have been formed by this policy. Now this policy will create 4 distinct but related identities. That means this policy creates 4 agencies. They are different by nature or in their function, but they are related to one similar thing, that is the space. Now, this will facilitate, all the 4 agencies are going to facilitate greater private sector participation in the space exploration, which was earlier traditionally the domain of ISRO only. ISRO used to focus on this, and now the private sector is going to participate in this using these 4 agencies. Now let's talk about all these 4 agencies one by one. The very first one will be your Indian National Space Promotion and Authorization Center. Now, what is the center? It is a single clearance window authorization agency. And what is the purpose of this? It will deal with space launches. It will establish launch pads. It will be involved in buying and selling of your satellites. And it is also involved in disseminating high resolution data among the other things. Okay, so it is going to deal with data dissemination also. Now, it will also share technologies, product, process, and best practices with NGEs. What are NGEs? Your non-government entities, which includes your private sector. Now, this Indian National Space Promotion and Authorization Center is responsible for sharing the products which are generated, or the process which is invented, or the new technologies which are generated between your private sector or NGEs and the government companies. So the distribution is with your Indian National Space Promotion and Authorization Center only. Now, when we talk about in space, it will create a stable and predictable regulatory framework. Why this framework is required? It is going to ensure that what will be the involvement of NGEs, what is the playing field, that is, what is the region where they are going to work, what are the regulations associated with them. Now it will act as a promoter by setting up industry clusters as a regulator, issue guidelines on liability issues. Because when some new entity is involved in certain sector, obviously the duties, responsibilities, liabilities, etc. are defined. So these will be defined by your in space for the private sectors. Also, they are going to set up some industry clusters, and they are going to be the regulator and key agency for the guidelines and liability issues related guidelines. Now, the second agency which has been formed is your New Space India Limited, that is NSIL. Now, what NSIL will do is it will be responsible for your commercialization of your space technologies. Now, NSIL is going to focus also on your manufacturing, leasing, procuring space components, technologies, platforms, other assets from private sector or your public sector. So the basic purpose of NSIL is going to be commercializing your space technologies, procuring them, leasing them, manufacturing them, etc. is with your NSIL only. Now, the third entity, which is your Department of Space. Now, what is the role of Department of Space as per this new policy? It is going to be the overall policy guideline maker. That is, overall the guidelines will be created by your Department of Space, and it is going to be your nodal department. That is the main department for implementing the space technologies, then coordinating your international cooperation, then coordination in the area of global space governance, programs in consultation with Ministry of External Affairs. So basically everything, all the guidelines, all the coordination at international level, or coordination at the global space governments level, or programs in the international market, all are going to be handled by your Department of Space in the guidance or the consultation with your Ministry of External Affairs. Mind it, here the ministry is External Affairs. Now, another thing which Department of Space is responsible for is providing appropriate mechanism for resolve your disputes arising out of space activities. Because now the private sector is also involved in this, so there is a chances that disputes are going to arise in every kind, for the technologies also, for the guidelines also. So the Department of Space is going to be the agency which is going to provide you the mechanism, that is a resolution mechanism for any dispute which is arising in the space sector. Now, the fourth agency which is involved in space exploration and the role has been redefined is the role of ISRO. Now, ISRO will be transition out of the existing practices of being present in the manufacturing of operational space system. Now, what this mean is that I told you that the earlier the ISRO was only who was involved in the space exploration, and the private sector was only involved with the designs, etc., which was required by the ISRO. Now the role of the ISRO is going to be more towards developing technologies, distributing them among private players also, and doing R&D, that is research and development oriented. Now, all the systems which are prepared by ISRO, or the mature system, that is already created systems, they will be transferred to industries for commercial usage. So now ISRO has to share the technologies created by them. And ISRO is going to focus on R&D in advanced technologies. They are going to build more and more technologies, and they are going to transfer it to industries for their commercial usage. ISRO is not only going to share the technologies, but whatever products are created by ISRO, what is the process involved, and what are the best practices for government companies and non-government companies to have a better understanding of the space, all this will be shared among the private players also by your ISRO. Now, what will be the benefit of this kind of sharing of technology and the products and process, etc. Now ISRO can focus on their major projects, yeah, long-term projects we can say, like Chandrayaan, Gaganyaan, and for smaller projects or which do not involve many complications, the private sector players can also be looked upon. So this is going to be one of the benefits of this policy. Now let us understand what is the role of private sector as per the Indian Space Policies 2023. Now, your NGEs, that is non-government entities, which include your private companies, they will be allowed to undertake all the end-to-end activities in the space sector. They can establish, they can operate in space objects, they can be ground-based attached, they can be related services like communication, remote sensing, navigation. All these activities can be done by the private agencies also, or the private companies or non-government entities after this policy. Now, regarding the satellites, now the private companies or the non-government entities, they can have a cell phone satellites. They can be leased. Leased satellites can also be there. Communication services can be over India or outside. They can have their own communication services. Remote sensing data, whatever data is collected, they can disseminate this over in India as well as in abroad. Now, the non-government entities can design, operate their own launch vehicles for space transportation. They can have their own infrastructure, also whatever is required for their space transportation. They can also make filings with your ITU, that is International Telecommunication Union, and they can engage in commercial recovery of asteroid resources also from now onwards. Earlier, all these things were not allowed to the private sector. This was only confined to ISRO. So in short, we can say that space activities is now open to your private sector, and security agencies can task your non-government entities for procuring your tailor-made solution to address specific requirement. That is, they can be assigned by your security agencies that we need certain data. So you do the space exploration and provide us with the data, and government do not have to perform that function in space. That is, the delegation of the work can be done to your NGEs. Now let's come to the importance of private sector participation in your specifically space sector. For that, we need to understand that how is this going to increase the global space economy. As of now, the India's share in global space economy was less than 2%. But we are expecting that after the implementation of this policy, it will increase to 10% in the future. That is, India is going to have a good amount of share in your global space economy after the implementation of this policy. Now, another importance will be your space exploration related, because when we allow private companies to perform your space missions, they have benefited many nations earlier also. For example, the US, they have private sector investment in the space, and for example, your SpaceX reusable Falcon 9 rockets, they have become very popular and they had the involvement of your private sectors. So India is also expecting that they can utilize the private sectors like US has already did. Now, the third benefit is your international competitiveness. When private sector is involved in any of the sectors, because private sectors are generally more competitive, so it brings more competition in the industry. And similarly, in the space exploration also, private sectors companies can help remain competitive in the industry. That is, India is going to be more competent or more competitive in the worldwide industry of space when we involve our private sectors. One more benefit is your flexibility. Now, private companies, they are more agile, adaptable to the any of the policies other than the government agencies. They respond faster, they have more quick changes, and they are very respondent towards the market demands and technological advancements also. We have always noticed in the government sector, the response is very slow, or the implementation is slow, or the change is slow. But that is not the case in the private sector, and private companies is going to help in that. They are more adaptive. Now, in spite of having so many advantages that is a private sector involvement is going to bring to us, there are certain gaps in the policies also. One of the gap is the role of InSpace, that is your Indian National Space Promotion and Authorization Center. The very ambitious role provides no time frame for necessary steps ahead. That means they have made in space, they have said that the roles are so and so, but there is no time frame which is defined that in how much time frame the particular function of the in space will be done. So no time frame is going to be one of the gaps in the policy. Now, another problem with the policy is that they have not given a timeline when ISRO is going to transition out of its current practices, whatever practices ISRO was involved in earlier, and what will be the time frame or by which year the private entities will be allowed to carry out their operations. When in space is going to create the regulatory framework, all these things have not yet been decided. Still, we do not have clear regulations and clear rules which are related to your FDI and licensing, government procurement to sustain the new space startups. Liability in case of any violations are yet not decided. Now, what will be the dispute settlement procedure which is not decided yet? So these are another gaps in the policy. Now, we have said that InSpace is a regulatory body, but they don't have a legislative authority. So this is another problem. Then InSpace is expected to authorize space activities for all, but government and non-government entities, both the government and non-government. So currently its position is ambiguous as it's function under the purview of the Department of Space. Now it is functioning under the Department of Space, and we are saying that it is going to authorize space activities for both government and non-government. So it is a little dicey matter, or we can say it is not very clear what will be the procedure followed. Now, as we understood that what are the gaps in these policies, what should be done to fill these gaps or how to deal with these gaps to make this policy more effective and implemented easily among all sectors. Now, this policy, Space Policy 2023, is forward-looking policy like we have seen. It has good intentions, a good vision, but that is not enough because we need to decide the time frame which should be provided for, and it is also necessary legal framework to translate this vision into reality. To successfully launch India into second space age where the private sectors are also involved, the time frame and the timeline should be set for every agency which is now involved. Another thing which is required is that government should bring a bill that will grant the statutory status to InSpace, which is very much required. And regarding the time limit, time should be set for both ISRO and InSpace for regulating their earlier functions and getting into the new transition. That is when ISRO is going to stop functioning their earlier functions and new space sector agencies, that is the private sectors or your NGES can enter this sectors. And what will be the time frame when your InSpace is going to formulate the guidelines for the proper functioning and proper implementation of these policies. This time frame is going to be limited. It should be limited and it should be given once and for all for your ISRO and InSpace. Now, the bill should also address the ambiguity related to your foreign investment, that how the foreign investment in this sector will be dealt with, and the government support for new space and startups, what kind of support government is going to provide and how should be very clear to fill these gaps in the policies. Now, when we talk about Indian Space Policy 2023, this is not only the step which government of India has taken for the inclusion of private players in the space industry. Earlier also, government has taken some steps. Let's look at those steps also. For example, in 2019 budget, government announced your setting up of Indian Space Limited, that is NSIL. In this policy, the role of NSIL has been defined. The setup was done in 2019 budget. Only they announced that New Space India Limited will be your formed. What was the mandate? It was for mass produce and manufacture small satellite launch vehicles. That is, it is going to deal with SSLVs, their manufacturing and mass production. That was the function of your New Space India Limited. And they are also going to deal with your PSLVs, that is Polar Satellite Launch Vehicles, and in participation with the private sector through technology transfer. That is, your NSIL was involved with private sector for technology transfer in the production and manufacturing of SSLVs and PSLVs. So this was in 2019 budget. Then came your draft National Space Policy of 2022, which unveiled the aim to increase the private sector involvement or partnership in space research and exploration activities. So 2020 was also talked about in the draft of the National Space Policy. We talked about research and exploration activities should also be carried out by your private sectors. That is, the government and the private sector should have a partnership in this. Now, instead of only partnering on the manufacturing on logistics side of operation earlier, private players were now given the access to ISRO's infrastructure. Earlier, what used to happen before 2022 or before this draft, that your private sector was only involved in manufacturing or logistics side of the operations. But now they were given the access of the infrastructure, technological resources, data which was available with ISRO, which could help them perform better in the space sector. Now comes your union cabinet's decision, or they approved in 2020 the creation of Indian Space Promotion Authorization Center, which is your InSpace. Now, this was again a single window, independent nodal agency between ISRO and private entities to utilize India's space resources effectively. That is, InSpace was set up in 2022, or the approval was given by Union Cabinet in 2022 as a single window platform and a nodal agency which is going to make sure that the ISRO and private entities have a coordination and you can utilize the resources very effectively. Now in 2021, another draft came up, that is Human in Space Policy 2021, that would look at facilitating the participation of non-traditional players in undertaking space activities. Certain entities are there which are traditionally involved in space activities. Now a chance will be given to non-traditional players also, which was talked about in Human in Space Policy 2021. So these are the steps the government has taken in the recent past few years regarding increasing the private sector's inclusion in your space industry. Now we have talked about ISRO in this article a lot. So now let us understand a brief history of ISRO. ISRO was established on 15 August 1969. Now, what was the aim of ISRO when it was established? It was to harness space technology for national development while pursuing space science, research, and planetary exploration. That means they will be involved in your space science, research, planetary exploration, etc. But they will use this technology and this data for the national development. That is how all these things can help in national development. This was the aim of your ISRO when it was established. Now, the Chief Executive Officer of ISRO is also the Chairman of Indian Government Space Commission and the Secretary of Department of Space. So you need to understand, whoever is the Chief Executive of ISRO, the person has two more responsibilities. He or she is going to be the Chairman of Indian Government Space Commission, and he or she is going to be the Secretary of Space Department, that is Department of Space also. Now, the India's first Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru established Indian National Committee for Space Research, which is also known as your INCOSPAR, in 1962. Now, this used to work in space research in India, and Vikram Sarabhai was the person who was leading this agency, and he was the founding father of Indian space program also. ISRO replaced your Indian National Committee for Space and Research in 1969. So this is how in 1969 ISRO got established, and this was the history of ISRO. I hope you have understood the Indian Space Policy 2023 in detail, how the private sector is going to be involved, what will be the different agencies, their roles, etc. and what are the gaps in the policies, what the government needs to do to make sure that the policy is implemented well. This policy is very important from prelims and mains both point of view, because the key features, gaps, etc. can be asked in prelims and statements, and in your mains examination you have to see the history of space exploration, how India was involved, what agencies were involved from India, and how the private sector has started involving in the space exploration. So this was it about your Indian Space Policy 2023. Thank you.